My people, we're ready to mount up like an eagle. Stand and fight against evil. A system rigged and deceitful. King, you can hear it when I rhyme. I'm a king, renewed in my mind. I'm a king, I got a different bloodline. I'm a king, jump, I am a king. Yeah.
Welcome to the King Talks podcast, where we are all about the truth, community, and discussing the things you care about because we care about you. I'm your host, Sean Slaughter, and on today's show, we're going to be doing a table talk, basically in reaction to our Jerome Gay Jr. podcast. So make sure you check that out on kingsmovement.com. And on the line, we have two distinguished gentlemen. First, we have Donal Cogdell. Did I say it right? Cogdell.
Yeah, Donal Cogdell, yep.
Donal Cogdell,
yep,
all right. And Donal's been involved with leading ministry and youth programs for over 20 years. He graduated with a BA in business and a master's in biblical literature from NIAC. He has a broad array of talents and interests, including a passion for social justice, serving the community, building the church, and he serves at his church at HOPE Astoria, where he leads a NYC chapter of a Christian men's brotherhood called K.I.N.G. That's us, which focuses on empowering men through Jesus Christ to be better husbands, fathers, leaders, and individuals. And Donal got bars, just for everybody to know. You know what I'm saying? He got bars. He's a rapper, a Christian rap artist, and his name is Reflect. And so, Donal, welcome.
Thank you, man. It's an honor to be here amongst a fellow person with bars, or both of you, actually. I listen to you, man, all the time, bro. You nobody come on a mic like you with that aggression and delivery and bars. So it's an honor.
Appreciate it, man. And on the other side of the corner is another gentleman that has bars. King, I don't know if you've, and audience, I don't know if you're familiar with this man's bars. But this is my good friend, Scott Lane, also known as his government, Adam Coleman. He's an author. He's an apologist. He's the host of Tru-ID, which is the podcast, so make sure you check that out. And of course, he's a guest, but you guys know who he is. So, Adam, was good?
It was good, man. Yeah, man. You know, I had bars, man, but I wasn't nowhere near on y'all level, man. Like Sean, you was like, you know, Sean Carter out there, John. You know what I'm saying? Like,
stop, bro. Hey, but look, but to keep it real, keep it real. You know, as my career was winding down and pretty much wrapped up, me and Lane would go to the Y, right? and me, Lane, and my man Brick, and a dude named Aaron.
Oh snap! You about to go there?
And we would have these text rap battles, and Lane would be destroying. Oh my Lord, Lane would destroy the rap battle. Ridiculous.
Wow.
Ridiculous. And then Lane will also just be writing these joints and be like, yo, where did that come from? Like, just this heat. So,
hey, man, 3-0 cats, huh? Y'all had 3-0 cats.
I'm telling you.
Hey, but Sean, you know he pushed me though, man. I tried to chill on him, man, but you know he pushed me, bro.
Probably the most hilarious
to that moment.
I'm telling you, the most hilarious text battle in the history of text rap battles. I even remember a line, but I don't want to say it because I don't want to embarrass my man. All right.
Yeah. You might not want to put that out there.
So anyway, gentlemen,
they haven't seen that side of me, man. I got.
Oh, they ain't seen that side of you. All right.
No, they haven't seen that side.
Well, gentlemen, let's go ahead and get into it. I want to ask you guys a little bit about, and I'm gonna start with you, Donal. If you can talk a little bit about, you heard the podcast. What were your initial thoughts just listening to Pastor Gay Jr. Kind of reflect on social justice and some of the points he was saying. Just a general idea. What were some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I was ecstatic, because a lot of what he was saying was what I agreed with, and I think he articulated it very, very brilliantly, and he pretty much captured, the problem of, in the false, he was talking about, hermeneutical gymnastics. He captured that well. He used biblical text, brought it to life, that apply across the board. So I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed your questions. I thought it was a phenomenal interview. I mean, he took it to the next level with the Paul illustration, and yeah, it was a great interview. I enjoyed all of it.
Isn't it interesting how when he broke that whole concept down with Paul and the magistrate, like, how many times I've read the Bible and seen magistrate. Now, I'm not a professed Bible scholar. I try to read my Bible every day like a good Christian family man, but I've read over that magistrate a million times, and when he broke that thing down on exactly what was happening with Paul, I did find that pretty brilliant. I think that was the nugget of the podcast. Lane, I'm gonna call you Lane, man. I'm sorry. Everybody knows you Adam Coleman. I'm just gonna call you Lane.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. You know what it is, bro.
Lane, what was your reaction as you listened to the podcast? Just kind of your first reactions, things that stuck out to you.
Yeah, first of all, man, it was a brilliant interview. It was a brilliant interview. And, Pastor Jerome Gay, shout out to him. He's a guy that I guess we first interacted like maybe about a year and a half ago. And I know a little bit about his ministry, you know what I'm saying? And you guys covered it in the show, but just really, this is a guy who's a boots on the ground, taking the gospel and impacting the community kind of pastor. And I felt that really came through throughout the podcast that you guys were talking about the prison ministry, the ministry to the poor, the adopting the Boys and Girls Club. I mean, this is not a guy who's, just giving lip service to the gospel in terms of how it impacts the way that we engage the community around us. This dude is living it, man. I mean, their church is really about it. I mean, I've seen videos on Facebook where posts where they got like the community day and people coming out and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought it was dope how that really shined through in the interview. And I'm gonna be honest with you, like, when it comes to stuff like this, I'm a real stickler for when people are arguing a point, like real stickler for just, clarity of concepts and laying out your argumentation solid and just sitting down, listening to him, like you said, breaking down the scriptures, really making his points in a clear and concise way. It was just dope. I'm like, I really wish that the John MacArthurs and James Whites and all these other guys who were involved in the drafting of that statement that y'all referred to, I wish they could have called this man, saying, before they just went through all the trouble of making a fool of themselves, maybe that's a bit harsh, but yeah, it's just, I think they could have saved themselves the mistakes that they made. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
Well, let's start there, and let me ask you a question. So we're talking about the statement that was made by, drafted by John MacArthur, Pastor John MacArthur, and co-signed by just a plethora of major pastors and ministers, and also has thousands of signatures.
Oh yeah.
Before they made this statement, how come? And now we don't know. I can't start there. I can't say that they did or they didn't. But from reading the statement, you've read the statement. I'm sure Donal's read the statement. Lane, why wouldn't they have reached out, or why don't you think they may have reached out? Because as I read the statement, it doesn't seem like, it seems like there was a consensus of men that felt this way. And instead of reaching across and saying, let's get another viewpoint, they just kind of went with their consensus, wrote what they wrote, and here we are. How come you don't think that they may be, I can't say they didn't make the effort, but it doesn't seem like there was any input from opposing views. How come you don't think maybe that happened, or we at least weren't privy to that?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is, and I guess you could always account for. I'm sure maybe there were conversations that were had, behind closed doors or what have you, maybe between folks. But I think that the statement that was drafted was a product of something that had already been brewing for a while anyway. I mean, you could point to, the flack that Lecrae has caught and all this kind of stuff. But more specifically, when you follow some of these guys like on Twitter, there's been like these online skirmishes, back and forth, like from people's public platforms, particularly in the social media realm. So, for example, I know that Tabiti Anyabwile, shout out to him, he had some skirmishes on Twitter, and also kind of going article for article with James White for a while. And then you have guys like, not so much John MacArthur, but maybe some of the other folks who contributed to kind of this where we are now. Again, having these online scrimmages, what I'm saying? Not necessarily battles, but just kind of tit for tat here and there. And interestingly enough, some months ago, you had Pastor Eric Mason. Some months ago, he on Twitter, he said, hey, you know what? We need to convene a council of different leaders, bishops, so on and so forth, to come together to address this race issue. And this needs to be a real ecumenical council. And he was shouted down for that. He was shouted down for that and criticized heavily by like the James Whites and those folks. I say James Whites only because I've specifically heard him be very critical of that idea. But then what's interesting is that, now leading up to this drafting of the statement, you actually did have these individuals who felt that they were on the same page come together, talk about it, and then draft a statement. You know what I'm saying? So which is, very akin to what Dr. Eric Mason had put forward, and yet they castigated him for that. So you've had these online skirmishes going back to back and forth rather. And I think that I'm assuming, that some of these have bled into maybe personal conversations behind the scenes that, again, we're not privy to. But, the drafting of the statement was definitely the product of something that was going on already. And so I think you had people throwing stones at each other from afar. And then the draft of the statement assumed, based upon that they had a handle on what their, I don't want to use the term opponents, but people they disagree with, were coming from. But the thing of it is, when you're shouting at each other from distance, just think about it, even in a natural sense. If you're shouting from a distance, sometimes you can't necessarily hear what the person's saying clearly versus sitting down together and having a conversation face to face where you can really, reason with one another. And so I think they took the shouting match and assumed that they had a handle on where people were coming from based upon the shouting match, and then drafted a statement along those lines. And it's unfortunate. I think they really missed an opportunity. I think in being hasty and not careful, they really kind of, struck out at a straw man, with the statement and drew a line in the sand based in part upon, misinformation and misunderstandings that could have been hashed out had they took more time and, brought some people to the table to really have these conversations with.
Donal, one of the things that Lane was saying was how, really the statement didn't appear out of nowhere. There were, quote unquote, Twitter beefs and things being said back and forth. Why do you think this statement came out now? And I know, whatever anybody feels about whatever politically, but what I do find interesting was, with the 8 years of Obama, there were certain Christians that were okay with Obama being in and maybe didn't like all his politics, but were cool with that. Now you have certain Christians that are cool with Trump being in and others, not cool with that. But this social justice thing is not new. There was 8 years of Obama that we were talking about social justice. Why now?
That's a great question. And, I think obviously what we've seen in the past year has been unprecedented, in the office with Trump being elected, with the KKK, being revamped to the alt-right movement, and white supremacy being emboldened again. And in that, I think the church, especially white evangelicals, they definitely got, they got a bad rap in that. And I'm not saying, I'm not saying they didn't deserve that. I'm just saying they got put on blast pretty much for supporting Trump. And I think whatever progress we felt that we had as a nation, we kind of had to take 5 steps back and see this, racism, white supremacy, identity politics, segregations of church, that all came to the forefront. And I think that they really, people felt, they felt he felt some type of way, and trying to almost wash themselves of the dirt. That's on them. I feel, that I feel they feel they've been pushed up against the wall, and it's very difficult when you come out defending this man, when you see Christians defending ungodly acts, and so I really think that's what it is. And we see our nation, and we see a divide. I've talked to brothers about, black Christians leaving churches during that time, somewhat of an exodus, because that all came to the forefront, and we saw that we weren't where we thought we were as far as unity, as far as connection, and they don't want to hold that responsibility. So it's easier to say, this is not part of the gospel. This is not part of God's work. It's pretty much what they essentially been saying, and that's what's frustrating to me, is the hypocrisy behind the statement. And I actually, loved, what Gray was saying, how, the statement undermines their own doctrine of total depravity. I read actually something from a member that attended John MacArthur's church, and she was talking about how they're underestimating, their depravity. Where are these limits that they're placing for racism, on themselves, on their own heart, on man? And so, I really believe that's kind of the crux of the issue. They feel backed against the wall, because somebody has to take responsibility for what the church is pulling at the seams, and the divisions. I don't think that the divisions are new; they're just exposed, So I think that's the reason why, that's what's going on now, and yeah.
Okay. I
had
think
another thought, but it hopefully it comes back. But yeah,
it's all good, man. I think what's interesting about this, and you said something, Donal, that was I think kind of made my ears stand up. It's funny. I think there was a feeling, at least amongst black Christians, I think there was a feeling that we always understood that there was, race issues within the church. We always understood that those issues extended themselves to music, to style of preaching, to order of service, whether your service was an hour and 15 minutes or 2.5 hours, to dress. Do you come dressed to the nines, or do you come? And it felt like with our generation, that some of those walls are being broken. You did see more multicultural churches. You did see more white churches doing black music, quote unquote, and black churches doing white music. There was still a line there, but I did feel, like you said, that there were some gains being had. And what I find interesting is that I do feel that this presidential administration has emboldened this statement. And I believe that without this president, even if there was another Republican in office, I don't think this statement comes out without this president in office, which I find interesting. And it makes Black Christians, I think it makes white Christians as well, who felt that progress, feel like, man, were we making progress? Or was this stuff really, really bubbling? Lane, I'm gonna throw kind of a two-part question at you, and you can jump in on it too, Donal. Were we making progress? And how does this letter hurt or help Christianity?
Well, I think it depends on how you define progress. Okay. And what I mean by that is I do think that just in America in general, and also in the church, there's definitely been a great deal of moral progress when it comes to, issues of race or related to race. I mean, obviously that's the case because, slavery is still not instituted and so forth. I mean, we've made some progress. With that being said, I kind of, I guess what comes to mind to me is like, let's say, for example, you break your leg, right? And let's say that for some reason you can't really get to a doctor to have it set back right. Well, if the skin was broken when you broke your leg, then that wound might heal, and maybe some of the tendons might heal around it or whatever, but you still might have like a bent in your leg. Your leg may not heal back, the way that it's supposed to, that bone. You see what I'm saying? And if that's the case, then you're going to walk funny. You know what I'm saying? Things are not going to be completely right. I suggest that when it comes to race having impacted the church, going back to the 16th century, right, where this race concept was absorbed into the church, and then, churches are segregated and so on and so forth, I think that's kind of like that broken leg, right? And that even though there's been some healing, there are some core issues that were never set back right. So, for example, going back to, even up to the 60s, I'll go back to the 30s for now. When you think about segregation and redlining, right? Black people and white people were legally separated from one another in terms of where they lived. I'm saying they did not live, generally speaking, in proximity to one another. Okay. Now, when you think about the fact that most often people attend churches, especially back then, where you couldn't just hop on a public transportation or get around like we can now. People tended to attend churches that were in close proximity to them. Now, if you're attending a church that's close to you, and those churches are in areas that are only Black or only white, because that's how it plays out. White people are going to church with white folks because that's where they live, and Black people are going to Black churches because that's where they live. And they're not really intermingling, right? Well, now you have a course set to where believers are not in fellowship with one another, right? And I think that pattern has a ripple effect on to today. Like, we still don't fellowship with one another. And that's in part because racism, the sin of racism, corrupted the culture and was instantiated in the law. And so we haven't been walking right for a while. We haven't been in proper fellowship with one another for a while. And I don't think that God would allow that to happen. He said that he chastens those who he loves, right? So I think that God is, in a way, chastening the church, right? Because, again, we're still not walking right because the sin of racism separated Black Christians from white Christians, just geographically speaking, right? And so that's why I think, and we may have discussed this in a previous show, but that's why I think that churches today need to go overboard in making an effort to reach out to churches that look different than them. Because we have to understand that the way that we are situated right now, being separated from each other, is in part due to the demonic influence of sin and racism on this culture. And we need to correct that. So, yeah, I think there's been progress, but I think that there are some core issues, and that's just one of them. But I think there's some core issues that just were never set back right. And because of that, it still causes problems. You're going to have these flare-ups from time to time that I think actually should call attention to what the real issue is, and we need to get it right.
Yeah, that's good. Donal, is social justice central to the gospel? Or let me ask you an even better question than that. Can a church that preaches salvation but rejects social justice be effective?
I would say no. I would say no. Because, when we talk about social justice, what is social justice? I define that by Mark, 12:31, or basically, what are the two golden rules that we know of? Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, so etc. The second one is love your neighbor as yourself, and those are the two laws that Jesus said all the law is built upon. Those things that has never changed, and I just believe social justice is loving your neighbor as yourself on a macro level. Is being concerned with your neighbor. The Bible says, how can you say you love me whom you don't see and hate your brother whom you see every day? Right? So social justice actually holds us accountable to being concerned about my neighbor, right? And when we see the lawyer who tested Jesus, right? He's like, what should I do to inherit eternal life? And then Jesus says, well, what does the law say? And then he states the golden rules that I just said. And then Jesus said, go and do likewise, right? Which is profound in itself, right? That this is important. This is how you follow me, by loving God and loving the people around you, loving those who God loves, And then he said he wanted to justify himself. He said, who is my neighbor? And at that time, Jesus gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, the famous Samaritan parable. And him asking who is his neighbor, I think that's a great question. And I think that's something that we're still trying to figure out to this day. Who is my neighbor? And then Jesus tells him, gives the illustration of the Samaritan that actually helped the Jewish man. People that were at odds, that hostility, they were at odds against each other historically, and they felt that Samaritans were ungodly, barbaric, all of that. But he was the only one that actually helped the Jewish man, served him, and was fulfilling God's law. So, and then Mr. Gray talked about how at judgment, the Father will ask, Jesus will say, come on in because you gave me drink. You fed me when I was hungry. You clothed me when I was naked. And they was like, but when did we do that? And he said, whenever you did what you did for the least of these, you did for me. And we have forgotten how important it is being connected to our neighbor. I mean, that is the result of the gospel, social justice. We're saying that a man, Son of God, came to earth and died on the cross for everybody. Took our punishment that we earned, and so that we can live, right? And then we are to do likewise. We are to carry our cross and do for others and give them this good news. I mean, I think it's essential to our walk. It is evident if you love God, you will love your neighbor, because you're loving the person that he died for. So I don't think you can separate social justice, because when we look at the Bible is rich with justice. I mean, from Old Testament to New Testament, he spends more time talking about looking out for the marginalized, for the foreigner, leave some fruit under the tree for the foreigner, and then he gets on the rich. So, there's this heart. And not only that, like, I was listening to Tim Keller and Ephraim Smith, and they really hammered it that God relates to the poor. You can see that in the Bible. Not only God relates so much with the poor that he came himself as the poor. So it's like if that doesn't resonate any stronger, how we should be concerned and dead on about our brother, being concerned with our neighbor. Like I think it's a very dangerous place, and I think that's why MacArthur is so that's the dangerous part. When he's talking about being claimed as a victim, and you know all of that jazz sounds like Republican. Republican talk dressed in Christianese. That's what he's doing. He's taking Republican thoughts and trying to force it to be Christian talk. That's never been the biblical narrative, never been the discussion. As far as I'm concerned. And I think it's a dangerous thing when we're not fighting for the poor, or we just throw it to the side as if it's not important, or as if God gave us an option not to be concerned about our brother or our sister with less than, or struggling, or going through. So I think it's inseparable.
Yeah.
I think it's inseparable.
I just want to say something right quick on that too, man, because you brought up several, good points. Particularly when you said, you talk about MacArthur, it sounds like Republicanese. And I think one of the main things that I see happening, and shameless plug, I'll be dealing with this on my next episode of Tru-ID, by the way, Tru-ID podcast. So check that out. In my part 2 of this social justice episodes I got going on. But anyway, one of the biggest problems that I see is there is people are quick to identify liberal or leftist ideology and inklings in what they believe to be the social justice movement, right? But I think what they don't see is how their own perspective has been informed by secular conservatism, right? So like in the scriptures, Jesus says that if you're going to take the speck out of your brother's eye, then you need to make sure that you first remove the beam out of your own. But I think these guys, they don't see the beam of secular conservatism in terms of how they interpret scripture even, in their own eye, because there's this implicit assumption that conservatism flows out of the biblical worldview and is in some ways, if not synonymous, close to synonymous with the biblical worldview. And I think that's a problem because actually, if you understand conservatism, I'll be getting into this on the show further, but just to kind of put it out there, if you understand secular conservatism, it comes out of a mosaic of biblical principles and ideas from the Enlightenment period, right? That was very prominent at America's founding. So actually, what some of these guys is conserving is Christian principles that have been overlaid with Enlightenment thinking, and they don't even realize it. So now when it comes out in their ideology, they're calling out the Eric Masons and the Jerome Gays and so on and so forth for supposedly absorbing and adopting these liberal ideas, but they don't even realize that some of the things that they have taken for granted, and believing that it's biblical, is actually a syncretized version of Christianity mixed with the Enlightenment period. And I think that's something that needs to come out.
Yeah, I'll take you one step further with that. And both of that is excellent input, gentlemen. I'll take you one step further with that, Lane. When it comes to secular conservatism, it's gotten to the point where those that believe in conservatism actually believe in this idea. They believe that Jesus would have you vote for a immoral candidate as long as he promotes the moral, quote unquote, issues that you believe in or that you stand up for. I've actually had conversations with men that literally have said, yeah, we understand. And I'm not just talking about Trump. I mean, you can, and both sides are, it's the lesser two evils on both sides. But you can just for the secular conservatism conversation, you can go into the conservative party as we have and find some of the most demonic, immoral, abhorrent behavior. But because they stand for our values, it's okay. And I think that's part of secular conservatism, where now you're separating private and public life, which Jesus didn't do that. Christ believed that who you were in public, who you represented in public, was the same person in private. So I think that's one aspect of secular conservatism that we're seeing, is the separation of public and private life. You can do whatever you want privately, just stand for my stuff. I also think that the same stance that has been taken against social justice has been used to uplift the abortion issue. Now, of course, we all don't agree with abortion, right? But what this statement has said is, well, again, there are personal issues and there are public issues, and this social justice issue is more of a cultural, personal issue, and it's getting in the way of the gospel. Then at the same time, we'll say, but we need to vote for this conservative because he stands against abortion and he stands against gay marriage, which are the same personal type of issues that social justice is, you know?
Exactly.
But see,
that's the hypocrisy.
But see, here's the issue, though. Here's the issue, is that the problem is what do they define as being a moral issue and what they define as being a non-moral issue. So that's the problem. Now, depending upon where you put, like, so for example, abortion is clear. It's obviously that's a moral issue, right? But I would argue that economics is a moral issue. You know what I'm saying you at some point, right? There's going to be an intersection between morality and economics. That's why you can't cheat on your taxes. You know what I'm saying? That's why people argue about, we're being overtaxed. You're imposing upon our freedom. This is what conservatives would say. If you're too heavy of a taxation, you're imposing upon the kinds of freedoms that human beings ought to have. And so therefore we can't have too big of a government. We can't have too many taxes, so on and so forth. They take those to be, those are moral issues, right? Dr. Martin Luther King pointed this out, towards the end of his life. He began to talk about how poverty it's a national sin. You know what I'm saying? And he was organizing the working man's march and so on and so forth. And so the problem is, if you don't understand, so here's the thing, economics and politics, those things are all downstream from metaphysics and what your spiritual beliefs are. You see what I'm saying? Those things are secondary. You got to have the foundation correct before you get to that. You see what I'm saying? Or else you're always going to go astray. And so the thing of it is, because they believe that all this other stuff has nothing to do with morality, or at least is in some sense disconnected from morality, they just want to harp on the abortion and gay issue, so on and so forth. But then, as if God doesn't have something to say about what we do with our money. But the fact of the matter is he does. Like Brother Donal referred to, in the Old Testament, you have the gleaning laws, where it was in the law, in the Mosaic law, that you have to, when you're harvesting, you need to leave a certain amount aside, for those who are poor. That's why it comes out in the book of Ruth with Boaz. That's what that's all about. Or every third year, when you talk about tithing, every third year, the tithe was taken up for the Levite and the poor and the foreigner. Those people who on their own were not in a position to gain wealth. Every third year, that's what the tithe was dedicated for. And certain other gifts, forms of giving were dedicated for the poor as well. The concept of doing righteousness, of doing justice, all that flows together in terms of, God saying, look, poverty is not just their problem over there. No, it's your problem. I'm saying, for the righteous, poverty is your problem and you need to do something about it. That's a moral issue. But, I'm saying, people aren't comfortable with that because it infringes upon them. It's like, dag, what you mean I got to do something about it? What are you talking about here? You know what I'm saying?
Well, you can't just take the issue that you care about and elevate it to the level of holiness, and then take the issue that they care about and say, oh, that's just personal. I want to read this. This is from ChristianHeadlines.com, and Russell Moore, who is the president of the Southern Baptist Convention's Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, he responded. And at the end of the article, he says this. This is pretty powerful. He says, this statement led by MacArthur comes after an unsuccessful push earlier this year by some in the Southern Baptist Convention to get the Protestant denomination to denounce the social justice movement. Moore added, "It is disheartening to watch the church repeat the same issues of the past with the same talking points. So if you were in the Southern Baptist or Southern Presbyterian context in 1845 and the question of slavery comes up, the response is going to be, you're distracting us from the gospel. We need to be people who are sharing the gospel and evangelizing the world and not getting involved in these social issues like slavery," Moore said. "Well, if you stand up and call people to repentance for drunkenness and adultery, but you don't call them to repentance for participating or applauding the kidnapping, rape, forced servitude of image-bearing human beings, then you have spoken to it. You have said, this is an issue to which you will give no account at judgment, and this is not what the Bible teaches." I found that profound. The talking points that were used hundreds of years ago in slavery, where elements of Christianity were skewed in order to say that this system of slavery was something that was of God or so on and so forth. The same type of talking points are happening today, and here's what kind of frustrates me. When I read comments on blogs that say this social justice issue is getting in the way, the gospel is all about salvation and sin. I don't even know where to start. You're doing such a disservice to the church, because basically what you're saying is that the church cannot speak to every area of life. All right, that's the first thing you're doing. The second thing you're also doing is you're shouting the gospel. You uphold shouting the gospel, but not living it out. We need to stop all this. We need to stop all this. It's all about the gospel. It's all about the gospel and salvation and sin. Well, between salvation and sin are all these issues. Between salvation and sin, this is how you live. This is how this stuff is lived out.
And to your point, okay, yeah.
Go ahead, Donal.
Yeah, to your point, I just want to throw in right quick. To your point, and I just talked about this on the episode I released 2 nights ago from Tru-ID, is that really what they're making is what you call a category error or a category fallacy, right? When they say gospel, what they really mean is those things that pertain to justification, like, kind of like a heaven or hell kind of thing. They're viewing the gospel in its totality with having specifically to do with salvation. And that's so unbiblical, it's not even funny. I'm saying, because really with the gospel, it's not just about a proclamation. It's about what is that proclamation pointing to, right? And when you understand, when you go from Genesis to Revelation, the gospel is pointing to much more than whether you're going to heaven or hell. It has everything to do with what you're doing right now. Because when you think about, the scriptures going to, the book of Romans, where it talks about justification, those who he predestined, it says he's predestined them to be conformed to the image of Christ. Sanctification. So it's not just about justification. You got to throw in sanctification. And that's the problem. That's the problem, is that we're having a sanctification problem. You see what I'm saying? And so when you're talking about, the gospel is just, all about sin and stuff, like, well, yeah, I agree. And the sin of racism, if it's still in your life and you're a believer, you need to get it out. You know what I'm saying? It's so hilarious, yo, because if people say, just preach the gospel. Well, no, the Bible never says that. It says, go out and make disciples. Go out and make disciples. And if you've got people who are being discipled, right? They're being conformed to the image of Christ. Jesus Christ, as Brother Donal laid out, he taught that we need to do righteousness and do justice. Okay. I'm saying, like, he was speaking to the Pharisees and was like, look, you guys tithe, mint, and cumin. But, when it comes to the weightier matters of justice, mercy, and faithfulness, you should have done all these and not left the other stuff undone. Right. So Jesus, he taught justice. He taught doing justice and doing righteousness. Those are very biblical terms. I wish I could get into it. But my whole point is, if you're being conformed to the image of Christ, then you're becoming the kind of person that loves other people. You know what I'm saying? Well, at least you should be, right? And if you love your brother as yourself, and you see your brother, in doing certain things, getting beat up in the world, you should want to go like that Good Samaritan and go help him out. You should want to go help him out. It doesn't matter if the person, that unarmed black man who got shot, is, across the, somewhere across the nation. It doesn't matter. Just like Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. right? And so if my brother, if somebody is grieving or struggling, so on and so forth, it's the Christian thing to do. It's the disciple thing to do, to go and be that good Samaritan and help. And if you're not doing that, you have a sanctification problem and you don't understand the gospel in terms of how it's supposed to play out in your life. That's an issue.
That's an issue, and I strongly agree, and I really believe. I mean, let's just keep it real. They don't keep it consistent with that though. Like as far as preaching the gospel is only when it comes, only when it's attached to black people or a cultural thing, as you were saying, Sean. Because if you go on John MacArthur's site, they preach on marriage, stewardship, finances, all these other things. That's not just the gospel. That's not just salvation. Like so, there's a conflict here, and they continue to expose their bias and their disconnect. And this is the problem, like you were saying, Adam, which was so good, is the identity thing, that people are still, they're not seeing that young brother who gets killed by the police as their brother. They're not seeing him as one of them. I mean, even the brother Botham, that got killed by the cop, who was a worship leader. Did you see a bunch of white Christians come and defend and advocate for him? A Christian worship leader? Like, no, we're still being confined by identity and not by kingdom, and that's where it's very scary. But the whole social justice thing, it's still, I think it's still very linked to you know white guilt, shame, denial, avoidance, not to address these issues. But everything else is fine, though. Focus on the Family is a very famous, conservative radio show. And they're dealing with all these different things that pertain to life, people, how to raise your kids, how to love your wife, all these things. And they're not just saying, "Oh, just stick to the gospel," So that's it's not. I would appreciate if they were more consistent, with that. But it's a hard issue.
Well, I think
Not
it's
a
a hard
doctrine.
issue. Then on top of that, I think it's I was telling a friend earlier today, it's something that I've been saying it for a little while, but I think the social justice, that concept, I think has been stolen from the church. I really do. I mean, there is no body of people who should be louder for good in any given society than the church. Who should be louder than us? You see what I'm saying? But yeah, I was telling a friend of mine earlier, it's kind of like analogous to, that's what I'm saying is they believe that social justice is a leftist thing. And I'm like, no, it's a biblical thing. And the leftists, unfortunately, I'm talking about the real liberals, unfortunately, they've just dipped out with it, and we need to reclaim that. Don't just, give up on it. I was telling my friend that it's kind of like if somebody broke into your house and, let's say you had this family heirloom that was just like really valuable, and they broke into your house and stole it. You know what I'm saying? And let's say that you and a friend of yours go find this dude, and you finally run up on him, find the guy, he's got your stuff, and your friend says, "Man, this dude's a scumbag, man. We shouldn't have nothing to do with him." You know what I'm saying? You're like, and you might say, "Yeah, he's a scumbag, but I still want my stuff back." You know what I'm saying? Like, I still want my stuff back. What I'm saying is, I agree that when you're dealing with like the real liberals and the real leftists who are out here trying to destroy anything that's good and holy, I got you. I agree that they're on some other stuff. I'm saying let's take social justice back. I'm saying let's go to the scriptures and reclaim what social justice is, expose them for the counterfeit version that they've been pushing, and then let's be the loudest voice in society for good. But the problem is that's going to cost people something. And I don't think everybody's willing to do that. I don't think everybody's willing to look in the mirror and say, "Dad, you know what? I need to get up and do something." I'm not just going to say something. I need to do something.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
costs, man. That costs.
It literally cost. It literally cost. I was talking to somebody about, just the boundaries of identity in different churches, and pastors sometimes are caught into conflicts where maybe more of their funding comes from a conservative group who may not would like the pastor to participate in social justice issues, and it rubs their funders the wrong way. So it literally can cost them, and I mean and that's what we're talking about, a kingdom agenda, not a world agenda, but that's what the world is affecting. I mean, when I read the article, I read all the blog series, did notes and everything, and I saw him defending capitalism. I'm like, bro, if why would a Christian leader be defending capitalism? Like, I could understand, you could talk about the good things of capitalism, talk about the terrible things of capitalism, and then there's good things of communism and there's bad things of communism. I mean, both of these systems are man trying to create, heaven on earth in a sense, trying to create harmony that they can't create, because there should be a social community mindset, and that should not neglect the individual. But these are just systems trying to create harmony. But what messes it up is the sin in us, So I, yeah, it literally costs. And when I see Christians defending man's systems as if they were God initiatives, they're entrenched in it, literally, and it's a scary thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, man. I was thinking about I was watching some TV show, and I can't remember. There's this guy who was undercover. He was a cop, but he was undercover in a gang or something like that. And he was talking about how he had been undercover for so long that he forgot he wasn't actually, one of them, one of the gang members. You know what I'm saying? And I think some of these Christians are like that. Like, they've been so immersed in Americanism, patriotic idolatry and secular conservatism. They've been in it so long, they forgot that they were sojourners in this world. And I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah. Gentlemen, you both of you guys are raising some amazing points, and I want to begin to wrap this conversation up. And the way that I want to wrap it up is this way. And I want both of you guys to speak to this. You have a lot of black, and because of course we talk primarily to men. You have a lot of men in this country. You have a lot of black men in this country who are jaded with Christianity because of what they see. I can't even front. I mean, I have a friend who was a good friend of mine, and while Trump was campaigning, this dude was literally promoting on his Facebook that Trump was God's choice, and if you voted against him, you were kind of going to reap the wrath upon yourself. And he was a good friend of mine, so he actually wrote me he DM'd me on Facebook and wrote me this long letter of why I should vote for Trump and how he was God's choice, and just kind of blind, just really blind, politically. And what I said to him was, I wasn't trying to have a political conversation. I was trying to have a human conversation with him. And I said, but do you understand where I'm coming from and why I reject everything that this man is spewing? Let's not even talk politics, all right? Because you can talk politics and issues, but let's just talk what it looks like. And so I walked away from that conversation, and I was heartbroken because I felt like I lost a friend. You know what I'm saying? And so you have black men in this country that are feeling the same way, and they might be feeling that way about Christianity. Both of you have seen, and Adam, you see it all the time on Facebook. Black men walking away from Christianity because they call it the white man's religion, and this statement is just another card that they can play to say, "See, this is what I'm talking about." So I don't necessarily want to get into that whole thing, because we could be here for another 2 hours on, how Christianity is not the white man's religion. But if maybe you guys can maybe just speak to, what can black men do? We have black men that sit in diverse churches, black men that sit in churches with white pastors that are dealing with this issue. black men who want to be in unity with their brother, with their white brother, their Hispanic brother, their Asian brother, all that type of stuff, but find it difficult because of these issues, and then have to raise a family and have to raise, sons and daughters, amongst these issues. Can you guys just give some advice on, what can black men do, and why, some of them who are thinking about leaving Christianity because of this, why that's not the smartest thing that they could do, just kind of speak to some of that stuff.
You want to go ahead, Brother Donald?
Sure, I can go. So yeah, one thing that always sobers me, is realizing that people are people, that we do live in a fallen world, and we all need grace. And so that always helps keep me balanced, in my approach and how I see things and how I should pray for people, how I should love people. When Jesus was hanging on the cross and he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I remember the first time that I saw that, and I was like, "What do you mean, Jesus? These men know what they're doing. They took the time and the intentionality to build this torture contraption. They took the time to beat the nails in your wrist, like they flogged you 39 times. Like all of that stuff seems to me that they know what they're doing, that they're aware of making your death a painful and embarrassing death." And so for him to say that was just mind blowing. But years realizing Jesus saw their blind spot. And I think, and his love for them, that he was actually dying for them, that he could oversee the blind spot, that he can cover their sins, that he was dying not just for them, but for the world. Like he saw it all with a huge, giant heart that is only godly, that is only of God and only a divine thing that we cannot do in our own power. And I just, you can't do that in your own might, in your own power. And so I think that love should allow us to see the blind spots in people, to engage them, to continue to pray, and to endure with them. The Bible talks about bearing with one another in love, right? Love takes an endurance with people, because they may not see us as image bearers, but they are still image bearers, and that sobers me and keeps me in the fight, man, because sometimes you just feel like, throwing blows or jumping out the ship. And so if Jesus can say with nails in his wrist, like, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," me as a sinner should be able to say that myself. So I think that helps you stay in the fight, because people, they'll change, they'll learn, they'll grow, and all they need to see is that love endures. There's some pastors, some leaders, like I feel like Matt Chandler used to be one of the pastors that said, "Let's stick to the gospel," out of the Reform camp. And then I saw a later interview where he said, I saw that the black men in my church, they didn't have to teach their sons the same thing that I was teaching my sons, and that means he was among the people, he was connected, and now he's at the HOPE Church conference with Dr. Mason, so I just think, man, we should never close the book on people and judge, what they, their capacity. So that's what I would say would help people. That's what helps me.
Yeah, man. That's dope. I just think about They're saying, if Jesus didn't turn his back on the church, then neither will I. That's kind of where it's at. And yeah, I guess from my perspective, Sean, you're absolutely right, man. Unfortunately, we have a number of black men and women, walking away from the church or not giving the gospel a fair hearing because it's seen as being, they believe it to be the white man's religion. And it is true that when things like this statement come out, that it adds fuel to that fire. And I'm talking about personally. I've had people hit me up and be like, see, man, those white people don't care about y'all. Y'all in the church, y'all loving on, y'all think everybody's all love, but those white people don't care about you. You know what I'm saying? And, really, if you hear them out, what they're saying is that Christianity doesn't fall on the right side of the moral issues that are apparent in the black experience. You know what I'm saying? And the problem is if your God, your concept of God doesn't fall on the right side of a moral issue, then it suggests that you have an inferior God, And I think that what we need to do is we need to go back to the scriptures, right? We need to go to the scriptures, see what the Bible actually has to say about the way that we're supposed to live in the context of living with one another. And we need to exemplify the fact that the Bible does command us to do justice and to do righteousness. And we need to show, not only teach, but also embody the robust ethical framework that flows from the Word of God. That's what we need to do. And we need to reclaim these things from the left, right? And exemplify it so that our brothers who can't see it, can see the gospel shining through and prayerfully by the Holy Spirit working on the heart, they can get it right. But in the meantime, I've got to be about the Lord's business. I can't wait for somebody else to figure it out before I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I would encourage everybody, listening to go look at the King Movement website. Go look at the King Movement website. Read the mission statement. Look at what King is already doing. I'm saying? We have brothers all across this nation in chapters who are literally doing justice, doing righteousness. They're doing things for their community right now as we speak. I'm saying? Mentorship programs, all kind of different teaching programs, community days, so on and so forth. King is out here and actually doing what it is that we're talking about. And I think that's what's so powerful. I'm not trying to be, cheesy and just plug it just because I'm a King member. I'm dead serious. You know what I'm saying? Like, when it comes to taking the gospel, understanding how the gospel should impact our hearts in such a way that we impact those around us, and then, bringing that to light, bearing that fruit. That's what I see when I look at the King mission statement and look at what we're doing. So we need to go ahead, get back in these scriptures, understand what it is that God really requires of us when he talks about, walking humbly with your God and loving justice and loving mercy. What does God really mean by that? And then living it out and showing the world, being that light on the hill. Don't hide your light under a bushel. Get out there, and as you do good works, men will glorify your God in heaven. That's how it's supposed to be. We got to get back to the scriptures and show people what the biblical worldview is about in terms of the ethical issues that we all have to deal with every day.
It's awesome, man. Gentlemen, great points. I'm just going to wrap it up with this quote and this final thought. Psalms 37:25 says, "I've been young and now I'm old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging for bread." And when I think of that scripture, I think of like my grandma. And I think of, my my grandparents went through segregation. And, the question that I pose to you guys, how do black men get through this? How do we deal with this? Well, it made me think about my grandparents and like, well, y'all went through segregation. You know what I'm saying? And you were young, and now you're old, and God has yet to forsake you. Within your righteousness. And so it kind of ties both of what you say, really getting back to the scriptures, but, showing love. And we have a great cloud of witnesses, those that have gone before us, our grandparents and great grandparents and our national heroes and international heroes like Martin Luther King, who we look back at some of the things that they endured and they experienced. And progress was made, and prayerfully those relationships were restored, and things got better. And so, You know, I agree with you guys, and I know things will get better because God is on our side. He's on all our side, black, white, Latin, Asian, no matter who you are, what color, what race you are, God is on all of our side. And so, you know, we thank God He's working with us. Brothers, Donal, thank you so much for joining us, man, and for your insight. We appreciate you, man. Where can people holler at you? You know, start some of your socials where they can, you know, connect with you.
Yeah, so people can holler at me on my website, iReflect720. iReflect720.com. There's my social media. My Twitter handle and Instagram is all iReflect720. There you can get my latest album, The Translation, which also has the King anthem on it. Yeah, iReflect720. That's the handle. If you Google that, you'll come across all my information and stuff that we're doing here in New York.
Word up. And make sure y'all check out that King anthem. Donald's on it, aka Reflect is on it. Show Baraka's on it. My G, Richie Righteous. Big shout out to Richie Righteous. He's on it.
Yes, sir.
Who else?
Man.
One other person I'm missing.
Show Baraka.
I said Show Baraka, right?
Eshawn Burgundy.
Eshawn Burgundy.
And
Eshawn Burgundy's on
yes,
is on the track.
Infantry.
So the track is fire. Go to YouTube and check that out. Lane, of course, tell us where we can find you. I know on your podcast, you have your first episode of social justice and the gospel, and you really get into it and start breaking some stuff down. You have your first part up there. You'll be doing additional parts. Where can people find the podcast? How can they holler at you on your socials?
Yeah, definitely, man. Appreciate it. So, you know, with the podcast, you could always go to Tru-ID podcast.com. That's Tru-ID podcast.com. And you can access the show that way. But you can also go to iTunes. We're on iTunes as well, and a number of other outlets. YouTube. You definitely check me out on YouTube also. And hit me up on Facebook. You know what I'm saying? I'm constantly on Facebook, man. I got, I love talking to people. So you can reach out to me there. That's, Facebook.com/Adam Coleman. Twitter as well. I'm not as sharp with Twitter though, man. I like to talk. So it's, Twitter, I can't get enough content in there. You know what I'm saying? You can't just
You
got to keep it short
like
on Twitter.
Paragraphs, bro. Twitter, it'd be like a
you
thousand
can't
messages.
write paragraphs on Twitter. So I get on there sparingly. But yeah, Twitter.com/ScottLane7. And also on Facebook, we do have a Tru-ID podcast page as well. So check us out there. And yeah, man, check out the podcast. I just dropped the Social Justice and the Gospel episode part 1 2 nights ago. And I should be dropping another one either tonight or tomorrow night, going into the second part. So, we really digging into it and addressing it a little bit of depth there.
Word up. All right, well, that's it. I am Sean Slaughter. You can definitely hit me up on the gram, the Sean Slaughter. Also Facebook, Sean Slaughter. Hit me up, holler at me, let you know what you think about the episodes, any questions, any insight. And also be sure to check out KINGmovement.com. That's where our podcast is. That's where our resources are. You can become a member of the King Movement. Definitely check us out. So that's what it is. We out. Peace.
Yeah. I had a dream. I saw black slaves in 2018, pulling the big king with a crown in the middle, looking like tug of war. I guess they forgot the inheritance of the Lord. Dying over streets when God gave him the earth. It's all in the Bible, just do your research. White man's religion, that's just fake news. The cross hit Africa for Europe even knew. This ain't black versus white, this is dark versus light. But racism might distract you from the Christ on sight. So here's the Visine, me and my team. Dark world, but we flip.